Hi Jane, thanks for joining us today. I'm Merina Martin. I'm the Homecare champion at CareLineLive, and we develop technology for the domiciliary care market. My background is domiciliary care management and business development, including lots of troubleshooting and building teams, doing lots of training.
I'm Jayne Ellis. I'm the founder and CEO of EF Training, and my background is nursing. I worked as a nurse for up to 35 years this year, and I've worked in both community and acute settings, latterly as working in a hospice, and that was the last frontline job I did before I stepped away to set up EF Training and do what I do now.
Okay, so why did you decide to set up EF Training?
Because I felt very strongly that one of the things that was missing from our training when we start in any kind of health and social care role is any kind of nod to the fact that this job is really emotionally difficult. And we don't get emotional health and safety training. It's almost as if the people that employ us think that the good outweighs the bad. Therefore, because we are doing something that we're very passionate about in an environment where we really care, that somehow that protects us from the fallout, and that's not true. And it had become more and more aware. I'd become more aware of it as time had gone by. So when I was working teaching, I had been teaching student nurses, and I had started to realise that although we were preparing them in a lot of ways, we weren't really preparing them emotionally, because I don't think when you work in any kind of caring role, you really understand what that is until you actually do it. So I felt that I was going to bring together that element plus what I'd seen when I was working within the hospice environment and back into the acute sector, where people were really having to take on a tremendous emotional burden from what they do and not necessarily being given the tools to be able to cope with it.
Okay, so when we met at the Care Show, your talk on compassion fatigue and vicarious fatigue was absolutely inspiring. Can you tell us a little bit about both of those conditions?
Yes, of course. So compassion fatigue is the normal reaction for us of vicarious trauma. So when we are with other people who are stressed, who are hurt, who are experiencing really difficult and challenging circumstances, because we are animals and we have to be connected to each other, we will pick up on any response from that person because we have empathy. And we have empathy because we've gone into a job where we need empathy. We need to be able to make a really strong therapeutic connection with people to be able to help them. And we want that. And you don't want to be looked after by somebody with no empathy. But that empathy is a bit of a double-edged sword, because the more empathetic you are, the more you step into somebody else's world to try and help them, which is ultimately what we're trying to do, the more their trauma affects you. And that's called vicarious or secondary traumatic stress, which is defined as a trauma that you witness or is described to you. Because you don't actually have to be in the room with somebody for it to affect you. You can also be affected over the phone. So telephone counselling, people also are affected by it. But when you're in the room with somebody and they are experiencing trauma or distress, maybe they're losing a loved one, maybe they're very ill themselves, they will be giving off signals to you subconsciously that they are in trouble. And your body will pick up on that. Your central nervous system will react because it has to assume that if this person is experiencing stress and trauma, there may be some threat to you. So on a very subconscious level, you pick that up. It starts that fight, flight, freeze response. But because of the work that we do and the environment that you're in, you suppress that response because you're not allowed to run away screaming. That will get you sacked. So you have to stay there and you have to hold it. That doesn't make those stress hormones go away. And if we're not very good at experiencing the type of training that we need to be able to understand what that is, then we keep suppressing it, but it doesn't go away. And over time it builds up. And sometimes people will notice that they are suddenly feeling the impact of compassion fatigue because there's been one particular thing that's happened. And for a lot of people, that was COVID, obviously, and going through the pandemic. But for most of us, it's a drip, drip, drip effect of being immersed in other people's suffering on a daily basis, that suddenly we start to realise that it's affecting us. And that is compassion fatigue. That is what is defined as compassion fatigue. It doesn't mean you're unable to do your job. It doesn't mean that you're weak. It means that your central nervous system is being affected on a daily basis by that vicarious trauma picking up on it, and you start to exhibit the symptoms of that suppressed response.
Okay, thanks, Jayne. So that leads very nicely into my next question. So what are the symptoms, and what symptoms should people be looking out for personally and with their colleagues?
So the founding father of the idea behind the term compassion fatigue is a American doctor called Dr. Charles Figley. And he started to write about this in the late 1980s. And what he did was he looked at the symptoms of a lot of people that were working in a care environment. So he looked at medical and nursing teams, at care staff, at animal welfare teams. So if you read his book, he talks about them as well. And he realized that a lot of these symptoms can be put into what he calls phases. So as we start to move ourselves through this stress response, as it starts to build up, it goes into phases. So the first phase is the anxiety phase. And as you said, Marina, when you talk about this is when you make a connection with people. Because as you start talking about it, they go, oh, you're talking about me. Because the first phase is feeling anxious all the time and not being able to turn off. They're getting home and just continuing to feel anxious. So you've had a really stressful day. You haven't dealt with it. That doesn't magically make the stress hormones go away. They still come home with you. And you can't turn off. You can't relax. And if somebody tries to make you relax, you feel really guilty. So you have to make a list that never ends of things you need to do when you get home and at work. So you go home and intellectually, we know that when we've had a really stressful day, we should go home and relax. We should go home and do something that's going to, help us. But we don't, because we all have busy lives. We all have families and other things that we have to deal with. So we go home and we're very tense and we can't relax. And sometimes later in the day, you will experience some of the symptoms of the physical reaction to the stress response. So you might find that you're shaky or breathless or tearful over something that you're not normally tearful about, because it's all built up. It might be that you're watching the television and your family will suddenly look at you and go, why is she crying because a seal fell off an iceberg? But that's just because that's your moment to sort of let this go, because you've been holding it in all day. A lot of people find that they will micromanage everybody around them. So they're in a bit of a nightmare to live with, actually, when we're like this, because we try and micromanage everything, not just the house, but like, say you were going to go on holiday, they're going to micromanage the holiday as well, and they won't just go and lie on a beach because that feels wrong. You feel guilty because you're not doing anything. The other thing is you'll probably have problems sleeping, because that's one of the first symptoms in this phase, where you either have trouble falling asleep, staying asleep, or waking up really early in the morning. And we address that a lot in the training because it comes up almost every single time you speak to anybody. And then what has happened, I think, a little bit more since the pandemic is that in that anxiety phase, people feel a sort of nebulous feeling that something's going to happen. It's almost like a sort of a threat that you can't put your finger on. Like you're expecting something else to go wrong. And it's really difficult to live feeling like that. From the outside, however, you look fine. You look like you're coping. From the outside, especially with women, because we're very good at internalizing it all, we will look like the perfect employee because we will come in early, we will leave late, we will volunteer for extra responsibility, and we'll always be the first one to organise the Christmas party, and also probably run the parish council and the PTA as well, because that's what we do. So it's difficult as an employer and a colleague to see past this, but really important that you do, that just because somebody looks like they're coping doesn't necessarily mean they are. The next set of symptoms he calls the irritability phase, and that's when it all starts to build up. And it doesn't happen very often that people will exhibit that type of irritability at work. It may be that you pick up the phone to that particularly demanding patient or relative, and instead of feeling compassion, you feel irritation immediately, which makes you feel very guilty because that's not who you want to be. But you don't normally take it out on them. What you do is you take it out at home. So when you get home, if somebody has done something that to them seems quite trivial, like left the top off the toothpaste or haven't unpacked the dishwasher when you ask them to, you will vent. You will just absolutely let fly at them. And that can be one of the big symptoms. And also in this phase, your body starts to give you symptoms. So you might find that you're tense all the time, that you're getting neck ache or backache, because we disproportionately suffer from both of those, maybe tension headaches, irritable bowel syndrome, or just being ill a lot because when you're full of stress hormones, it's really difficult for your body to fight off infection. So you might notice that as well. So that's kind of the irritability stage. Then if you're going from fight and flight, the next phase is a sort of freeze phase, and these phases are quite similar. Then he calls them the withdrawal, and then what he calls the zombie phase, but I don't like that, so I've changed it to robot. So these two are when you're starting to protect yourself. So when you have feelings of feeling quite emotionally detached from what you're doing suddenly, quite shut down, wanting to just go home, shut the curtains, bottle of wine, Netflix. And a lot of people will use that as a way of changing their feelings. So they will use either overeating or undereating or overexercising or drinking alcohol to change the way they feel because they're feeling so shut down. And then in the final phase, which is that robotic phase where you are quite detached. So from the outside, what people see is that this person has lost their compassion. They've probably lost their drive and enthusiasm for the job as well. They are still turning up because they want to, but they're quite shut down and quite hardened. And you do sometimes hear people say within teams, "Oh, so and so is very hard," and that's what happens. And they're trying to shut down to protect themselves. They can't take on any more. So as an employer or a colleague, you would notice that they are pushed back on any change. They don't want to engage with you. And if you go to them for emotional support, they will shut you down. They will say, "This is how you cope. And you mustn't get so attached to people. And if you can't cope with this job, go and work in Tesco's," that kind of behaviour. And you don't want to have a boss like that, because what can happen is that people copy that management style or copy that caring style, and you end up with a whole team that thinks that that's okay. So we want to try and stop people from getting to that point. So the key is to recognise the symptoms and then learn to do something about it.
Okay, that's incredibly interesting. In terms of, in general, people will say, I feel really stressed. They might not be working in health and social care. Are the symptoms different for, what we would probably think as general stress situation, or is it pretty much the same? We're all going through the same when we're feeling stressed and anxious.
So the short answer to that is yes. The slightly long answer is no. What Charles Figley and his team originally worked out in the research that they did is, for example, if you were working in a very high stress environment like the stock exchange, and you had a lot of pressure put on you to make a lot of money really quickly, you turn that pressure into stress yourself, because that's your intellectual thing. You have decided that you're going to put this stress on yourself, right? If you are immersed every single day in another person's suffering and you're picking up that vicarious trauma day in, day out, then the stress response is the same, but the cause is different. Right. And that's what we have to remember.
So Jayne, just following on from that, what would your top 10 tips be for people who are feeling that they're really struggling and they're sort of really hesitant to approach their employers or their colleagues? What would your advice be?
So there's two parts to this. First of all, taking individual responsibility. Okay, you have chosen to do this job. And it's in the same way that if you were an athlete and you had chosen to run the marathon, you would also have chosen, therefore, to make sure that you are fit enough physically to be able to do it. And elite athletes also make sure that they don't get hurt. There's two sides to their training. So we have to see ourselves as emotional athletes if we're going to do this job. So you have to put the time into yourself. And that's very easy for me to say and very difficult to do, because people who are naturally very giving tend to feel guilty if they spend any time on themselves. It's very strange. But if actually you ask the people who we were caring for, should you be looking after yourself? They're going to go, yes, definitely you should be looking after yourself. Because if you don't look after yourself, you can't look after me. So we have to put some time in to look after ourselves. So 10 minutes a day, minimum, doing something that is just for you. So thinking about yourself holistically, one of the things that you can think of to start with is about relaxation. It's really important when you're absorbing that trauma that you release it in some way, because otherwise you go to bed at DEFCON 5 and you wake up at DEFCON 4 and then there's nowhere else to go. So you have to make time every day to go from that stress response to the relaxed response, okay? And to do that, you need to do something that relaxes you. And that, for some people, is things like mindfulness and relaxation. It might be listening to music. It might be yoga or Pilates or exercising, but something that gets rid of some of that adrenaline response and helps you to relax. Something that activates your vagus nerve, which is your off button, which is reduces your blood pressure and helps you to relax. So having something like that as part of your day is absolutely essential. Because if you don't do that, then the stress response just keeps building and the hormones keep building. And unfortunately, what can happen then is exactly what happened to me when I started to experience compassion fatigue, which is that I ended up having panic attacks because I wasn't releasing that adrenaline response. So you need to go from fight and flight to rest and digest. There's something like that every day, which you can fit in 10 minutes. Then you need to be thinking about what you're eating, because that's also really important. If you eat a lot of rapid-acting carbohydrates that are very high in sugar, you can actually make yourself feel more stressed. But the problem we have is that as human beings, we tend to go for that kind of food when we're feeling sorry for ourselves. So it's about thinking about what you're eating. It's about taking time to do things that refresh and refill your emotional energy. So that's things like hobbies, spending time with family and friends, doing something that's completely disconnected to work, because you need that. You need that because that's what keeps you going. And sometimes it's very easy when you're very stressed to just think, I haven't got time for that, and I'm not doing it. I'm going to go home and every single day I'm going to watch the television. And the other thing about the television is you need to be careful that you're not vicariously traumatizing yourself further, because as an empathic person, if you watch the news or you watch violent programs, they will feed into your feeling of anxiety and actually make you feel worse. So be careful what you're watching as well. Go Disney or makeover shows, because they tend to make you feel better. And the other thing to do is to prioritize sleep. And again, easier said than done, because you can get yourself into a vicious circle where you get so stressed and your brain is just going round and round and round. It's difficult to sleep. There are some really good sleep strategies out there. There are apps you can use. There are things that you can do for yourself. Be careful about caffeine, because it can have an effect even 10 hours after you've drunk it on keeping you awake. Be careful using alcohol to send yourself to sleep, because it's actually a stimulant. Make sure that your room is dark and your bed is comfortable and that you have a good sleep routine. All of those things will really help. And if you add all those things together, and you talk about things when you're feeling unhappy as well, that you feel you find someone you can share how you're feeling with, and there are people out there that you can, then as an individual, you can start to create a little bit more emotional resilience. And emotional resilience is a muscle. You have to keep doing it. It doesn't just, otherwise it slips. Then on the flip side, as an organization, you need to recognize that compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma are part of the job. They're not something that happens to other people. They happen to every single person who works in a caring role, or those who care for them, because it's also human resources managers and all of the managers that work within the team take on the emotional burden of the people that they're caring for. So it doesn't matter whether they're lying in a bed or you're helping them up the stairs. It's exactly the same process. So you need to talk about it, keep it on the agenda, make sure that you've got things in place to be able to give people good quality debriefing, especially if they work on their own. Bring them and find out how they are, especially if something's happened. Because when we do the training, we ask people this in the middle of the day. What does the organisation already do and what could they do better? And the things that have come up have been things like, make sure we've got somewhere to go when we need a break. Like, make us a nice staff room, make us a nice outside area, not just if you smoke, but for everybody. Give us time to debrief when something's happened. Learn as an employer how to do a basic debrief. It's really, really simple. I've got one I can send you, but make sure you know what you can do and that people can do that at home. Make sure that you're keeping emotional well-being on the agenda, and that when you say you've got an open door policy, you mean it. You don't just say it. And when somebody comes to you with emotional problems, because of the work they're doing, you don't belittle how they feel or make them feel guilty. because they'll never come to you again. And what will happen is they leave, and that's what we're seeing a lot of. So as an organisation, you have a responsibility in the same way as you have for their physical health and safety, you have responsibility for their emotional health and safety. And there are things out there that you can do as an organisation that are really simple that will have a huge impact.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting, because from my domiciliary care background, having an open door policy and meaning it means that you welcome your carers. You know, we would say to our carers, come in, have a coffee anytime you want. If you've ever got a problem, you know, always come to us. But you don't, you know, you have to mean it. And, you know, because a lot of carers, you know, in our sector are lone working, so they don't have anywhere to turn, and you know, they don't have a check-in. And one of the things that we're going to be developing at CareLineLive is the carer portal, which will be specific to HR stuff, but also specific to carer wellbeing, because that is so important, and it gets lost in the franticness of the domiciliary world. So, you know, it's just fantastic what you're doing, Jayne. What does EF training offer? You know, what courses do you have? You know, how can you help people in the sector? How can you help people that are domiciliary care providers?
So what we do is we do training. So our core training day is recognising and responding to compassion fatigue. And what we do is we do a pre-course questionnaire on everybody that comes. We do 20 people at a time face-to-face or 10 online. Everybody gets the pre-course questionnaire, and the pre-course questionnaire is us looking for some of the symptoms of the impact of compassion fatigue. So are people sleeping? Are they overworking? Actually, we ask them, are they thinking about leaving? Because obviously that's also a big thing. Then we run the training day, and the first part of the training day is what I was talking about to start with. So what is compassion fatigue? What is vicarious trauma? And we make sure that it's sector specific what we teach. So we use the right language, and we make sure that we are talking to the audience in front of us, because obviously there's a big difference between teaching this to a group of consultants and teaching it to a group of care staff who some might have English as a second language, and then you've got some cultural issues as well. So we always try and make sure we know who we're in front of to make sure that we can do that well. So we do that bit, and then we talk about self-compassion. And the reason we do that first, like the anatomy and physiology bit, is that if people don't really understand what this is, they won't do anything that you suggest because they don't understand why they need to. So we have to do that bit first. We then talk about self-compassion, and we do some self-compassion exercises, looking at what it is and what it isn't and why we're bad at it. Then we have what we call our toolkit for resilience. So that's when we talk about strategies for eating, strategies for sleeping, strategies for exercise, and a smorgasbord of different things that you can do to help yourself relax, because not one size fits all. Before lunch, that's when we ask everybody the question, what does the organisation do and what could they do better? We don't let that turn into any kind of moan fest. It has to be very, very positive. And that, plus the evaluations in the pre-course questionnaire, then goes back to the manager or whoever booked the training, so that you get a snapshot of what's happened. At the end of the training day, everybody that comes on it writes themselves 3 promises, which is like a little self-care plan. 3 things they think they're going to do to change, to help themselves. Sometimes they'll say, I'm going to try yoga, I'm going to try relaxation. Sometimes they say, I'm going to try the recipes in the food that you gave us. Sometimes they say, I'm just going to be kinder to myself, which is what we want. That gets reflected back to them after 2 weeks. And in that email is a little email that says, remember that this is what you said. And it has a link to a little free self-care gift, which comes another 2 weeks later, which also reminds them again. 12 weeks after that, we send them a post-course questionnaire that asks them whether or not they're feeling better, whether they've noticed a difference in themselves, in the team, whether their family have noticed a difference in them, and what tools they're using. And that's us being able to see whether or not the training is working. The only other thing they then get from us is a quarterly magazine, which has more tips and things in it, and access to the website for more information and support if that's what they need. That's our core one. Once you've done that one, as a manager, you can then access the manager's course, which is just a 3-hour one, which is basically what I was talking about earlier, which is like flipping it over and saying, right, how can I support colleagues who are in the different phases, and what can we do to be proactive as an organisation? We also offer an online refresher for people that have done the first one, who maybe don't want to go back and do another one, but still want some more tips and tricks. And then we do a part 2, and part 2 usually happens about a year after part 1. And we're just going back into a care home actually to do this for them. And that's a bit much more of a reflection. So it's talking about, now you've got this information, how have you coped? What have you changed? But then more psychological sort of tricks, and we call them mind hacks to help people with anxiety and stuff. We talk a lot about the mind-body connection. We talk a lot about the microbiome and how that can help change the way you feel. So those are our little group of training that we do. And all of them are monitored in the same way, pre and post. Everybody gets that because it's really important, because it's how we measure our impact. Because there's no point in us going in if it doesn't work. I'll stop doing it if it doesn't work.
That's great, Jayne. Thanks ever so much for giving us your time today. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I don't think so, but thank you very much, and thank you for your support for what we're doing, and I hope that we can support what you're doing as well.
Fabulous. Thank you so much.